Agnes Steven's alarm buzzed at 5:47 a.m., 3 minutes before it was set to ring. Her internal clock had learned to anticipate the sound, a skill developed over months of rising early to maintain the illusion of effortless domesticity. At 63, she moved through the pre-dawn darkness of her suburban kitchen, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had perfected this routine to an art form. The coffee maker gurgled to life as she retrieved eggs from the refrigerator, her movements automatic and silent. Through the window above the sink, the neighborhood remained wrapped in sleep. Porch lights casting amber pools on empty driveways, sprinkler systems beginning their measured rotations across manicured lawns. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maple Grove Estates had been her dream once, back when she'd been married to Marcus, and they'd scraped together the down payment for this 4-bedroom colonial. Now it felt like a museum of her former life, each room echoing with the ghosts of different expectations. The pan heated as she cracked 2 eggs, watching the whites spread and bubble at the edges. Danny preferred them over easy, with the yolk still running, a preference she'd memorized along with hundreds of other small details that comprised the architecture of his daily comfort. 2 slices of wheat bread slid into the toaster. Orange juice, not apple. His thermos filled with coffee, 2 sugars, splash of cream. She moved upstairs while the eggs cooked, her bare feet silent on the carpeted steps. Danny's bedroom door stood ajar, revealing the controlled chaos of a 19-year-old's personal space. Clothes draped over his desk chair, textbooks scattered across the floor, the faint scent of cologne and unwashed laundry mingling in the stagnant air. Agnes gathered his dirty clothes into the hamper with the methodical movements of someone performing a task that had long ago ceased to register as conscious thought. His sheets needed changing. She stripped the bed efficiently, bundling the linens with the practiced motions of someone who had done this thousands of times. In the hallway linen closet, she selected fresh sheets, navy blue, his preference, and remade the bed with military precision. Hospital corners, pillows fluffed and positioned just so. She straightened his desk, closed textbooks, and collected the growing collection of water glasses that seemed to migrate to his nightstand like some form of domestic archaeology. Back in the kitchen, she plated his breakfast and wrapped his lunch: turkey and Swiss on wheat, an apple, granola bar, and the homemade cookies she'd baked Tuesday evening while he'd been out with friends. The lunch bag bore his name in her careful handwriting, a detail that had once seemed nurturing but now felt like the marking of institutional property. Agnes poured herself coffee and stood at the kitchen island, watching the morning light creep across her carefully maintained home. The silence felt heavy, pregnant with the weight of unspoken thoughts. 6 months since the divorce papers had been signed. 6 months of rebuilding a life she'd never planned to live alone. 6 months of watching her son treat her carefully orchestrated domesticity as invisible as the air he breathed. The sound of Danny's alarm drifted downstairs, a tinny pop song that repeated until he fumbled for his phone. Agnes counted the snooze cycles. Once. Twice. On the 3rd alarm she heard his feet hit the floor, followed by the shuffle of movement and the bathroom door closing. She opened her laptop at the kitchen counter and began the morning's administrative tasks. Electric bill due Thursday. She'd pay it online after Danny left. Grocery list updated with items from the depleted refrigerator. His car insurance payment, deducted automatically from her checking account because he'd forgotten to set up his own banking. The mundane maintenance of modern life, all flowing seamlessly through her attention and effort, while remaining entirely invisible to its primary beneficiary. "Morning, Mom." Danny appeared in jeans and a rumpled t-shirt, his hair still showing pillow marks. He grabbed the plate of eggs and ate standing at the counter, scrolling through his phone while mechanically chewing. "Good morning, sweetheart." Agnes handed him his lunch bag and thermos. "Don't forget you have that psychology paper due Friday." "Yeah, I know." His attention remained fixed on the small screen. "Jake and I are working on it tonight." Agnes bit back the observation that Jake Morrison had never struck her as particularly studious. Danny finished the eggs in silence, rinsed his plate with perfunctory efficiency, and kissed her cheek. a gesture that felt more habitual than affectionate. "Thanks for breakfast." He was already moving toward the garage door. "I'll probably be late tonight. Study group." The door closed behind him, with a decisive click, leaving Agnes alone with the coffee maker's mechanical breathing and the hum of the refrigerator. She stood motionless for several minutes, studying the empty plate he'd left on the counter, despite the dishwasher being 3 feet away. At 9:15, her phone buzzed with Elena Rodriguez's name on the caller ID. "How are you holding up?" Elena's voice carried the warm authority that had made her a successful divorce attorney and an invaluable friend through Agnes's recent upheaval. "I'm fine." Agnes settled into the living room armchair, her coffee growing cold in her hands. "Same routine. Danny's doing well in school." "That's not what I asked." Elena's directness was both comforting and unsettling. "You've been taking care of everyone else for 40 years. When do you get to take care of Agnes?" The question hung in the air between them, carried across the cellular connection like an unwelcome diagnosis. Agnes stared out the front window at Mrs. Patterson's garden, where the elderly neighbor was already tending to her roses despite the early hour. "He needs stability right now." The divorce was hard on him. "The divorce was hard on you too, and you're 63, Agnes. You should be thinking about your own future, not serving as an unpaid domestic service for a grown man who barely acknowledges what you do." Agnes felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same constriction that had been building for months like pressure behind a dam. "He's not ungrateful, he's just young, focused on his studies. He's 19 and fully capable of doing his own laundry. When my twins were his age, they were managing their own apartments and working part-time jobs." After Elena hung up, Agnes remained in the chair, staring at nothing. The house around her pulsed with its own quiet rhythms, the dishwasher cycling through its wash program, the heating system's periodic whisper, the grandfather clock in the hallway marking time with its measured persistence. She found herself walking to her bedroom, opening the drawer of her nightstand, where she kept the collection of travel brochures she'd been accumulating since the divorce. European river cruises, riding retreats in coastal Maine, senior living communities with their promises of active adult lifestyles and freedom from maintenance responsibilities. The brochures felt thin between her fingers, their glossy surfaces depicting a world of possibilities that seemed to exist in an alternate universe. A universe where 63-year-old women weren't tethered to adult children who saw them as invisible infrastructure rather than autonomous human beings with their own dreams and diminishing time. Agnes spread the brochures across her comforter, studying the faces of older adults who looked genuinely happy. Not the performed contentment of dutiful mothers, but the authentic joy of people living deliberately chosen lives. The river cruise through Provence cost $4, $200 per person. The main retreat was $1, $800 for a week. Even the modest senior community required a down payment that exceeded her current savings. She calculated quickly in her head. Danny's monthly expenses, food, utilities, car insurance, phone bill, the countless small expenditures that flowed through her credit cards, totaled nearly $800. Money that could accumulate towards something that belonged to her alone, something that acknowledged her value as more than a service provider. Agnes gathered the brochures carefully and returned them to the drawer. Outside her window, the neighborhood was fully awake now, children waiting for school buses, adults backing out of driveways with purpose and destination. The morning light had shifted to the harsh clarity of full day, illuminating the careful order of her perfectly maintained home with unforgiving precision. The silence stretched around her, heavy with the weight of unexamined assumptions and the growing recognition that something fundamental had to change. She had sacrificed her career, her marriage, and now potentially her remaining years, to maintain an illusion of family that existed primarily in her own devotion. The grandfather clock chimed 10 times, its sound reverberating through the empty house like a countdown to something she couldn't yet name, but increasingly felt approaching with the inevitability of weather. The grandfather clock's 10 chimes still echoed in Agnes's mind as evening approached, their measured cadence having marked the slow passage of her solitary day. She had spent the afternoon in mechanical motion, vacuuming carpets that barely showed wear, organizing closets that were already pristine, preparing a dinner that Danny had texted he wouldn't be home to eat. The leftover pot roast now sat wrapped in the refrigerator, another small monument to her invisible efforts. At 7 o'clock, Agnes changed into comfortable clothes and gathered her book club materials. The monthly meeting of the Maple Grove Literary Society had been one of the few social anchors she'd maintained through the divorce. A 2-hour reprieve where she could discuss something other than household management or her son's academic schedule. Tonight they were analyzing The Awakening, Chopin's meditation on women's liberation and the price of self-discovery, a choice that now seemed almost mockingly relevant. She left a note on the kitchen counter, as was her custom. Book club until 9:30. Pot roast in fridge. Love you, Mom. The ritual felt increasingly hollow, but she performed it anyway, some part of her still believing in the importance of these small gestures of care. The literary discussion that evening had been particularly animated, with Martha Chen arguing that Edna Pontellier's Awakening was ultimately selfish, while Elena Rodriguez, attending as Agnes's guest, maintained that self-preservation was sometimes the only moral choice available to women in impossible situations. Agnes had found herself unusually quiet, the parallels between Edna's constrained life and her own domestic entrapment too uncomfortable to examine directly. It was only 8:45 when she turned onto Sycamore Drive, having left early when Elena was called away by a work emergency. The approach to her house revealed an unexpected scene. Cars lined both sides of the normally quiet street, music pulsing faintly through the evening air, warm light spilling from every window of her carefully maintained colonial. Agnes sat in her car for several minutes, processing the sight of her home transformed into something unrecognizable. A red Solo cup lay crushed on her front lawn. Her porch furniture had been moved to accommodate clusters of young people she didn't recognize, their voices carrying the particular timbre of intoxication and youth. The careful order of her domestic world had been casually violated, replaced by chaos she neither authorized nor understood. She parked at the end of the street and walked slowly toward the house, her book club tote bag feeling suddenly absurd against the backdrop of collegiate revelry. The front door stood open, propped by one of her decorative ceramic planters, now serving as a doorstop for strangers who treated her home as public space. Agnes slipped through the side gate into her backyard, moving with the stealth of someone entering their own property as a trespasser. Through the kitchen window she could see young people she didn't recognize, raiding her refrigerator, using her countertops as mixing stations for drinks, dropping bottle caps on her carefully maintained hardwood floors. The pot roast sat ignored on its shelf, while they consumed the groceries she'd purchased and organized with such methodical care. She entered through the back door, the noise hitting her like a physical force. The basement door was open, revealing more party guests in her finished recreation room where Danny's friends had apparently set up some form of drinking game using her coffee table. Someone had spilled something red on her cream-colored sofa, wine or juice. She couldn't tell from the distance, but the stains spread like a wound across the fabric she'd selected so carefully during happier times. Agnes moved through her own house like a ghost, unnoticed by the young people who filled every room. In the living room, she spotted Danny near the fireplace, surrounded by his usual circle of friends. Jake Morrison stood at the center of the group, his voice carrying over the music with the particular confidence of someone accustomed to commanding attention. "I mean, seriously," Jake was saying, gesturing with a red cup that sloshed dangerously close to Agnes's antique Persian rug. "My parents just hired this new cleaning lady, and she's like 50-something and acts like she's doing us this huge favor. Like, lady, we're paying you. Do your job and shut up." Agnes pressed herself against the hallway wall, hidden behind the coat closet but able to hear every word. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her book club materials, the discussion of Edna Pontellier's Awakening taking on a surreal quality in the context of this violation of her domestic sanctuary. "That's the thing with these older women," another voice chimed in, someone she didn't recognize. "They think they're owed something just for existing. Like, sorry your life didn't work out, but that's not our problem." Laughter rippled through the group, cruel and dismissive. Agnes felt something cold settle in her stomach. A recognition that she was witnessing her own demographic being casually dehumanized by young people who had never questioned where their comfort originated or who maintained the infrastructure of their daily lives. "Speaking of which," Jake continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial level that somehow carried more clearly through the noise. "Where's your mom tonight, Danny? She's usually hovering around here like some kind of domestic surveillance system. Agnes held her breath, waiting for her son's defense, for some acknowledgement of her care and sacrifice. Danny glanced around the room with the casual confidence of someone completely at ease in his domain, then shrugged with studied nonchalance. "Oh, she's at some book thing." His voice carried a note of practiced indifference, the tone of someone eager to distance himself from potential embarrassment. "Don't worry about it, she's basically just the live-in help anyway." The words hit Agnes like a physical blow, each syllable landing with devastating precision. Live-in help. The phrase echoed in her mind, reducing 40 years of maternal devotion to a service position, transforming love into labor, sacrifice into mere employment. The laughter that followed felt like salt in a wound she hadn't realized was so deep. "Dude, that's cold," one of his friends said, but the tone suggested admiration rather than criticism. "It's just practical," Danny replied, his voice gaining confidence from the group's approval. "I mean, she doesn't really have anything else going on. Might as well make herself useful." Agnes backed away from the wall, her chest tight with something that felt like drowning. She moved through her own house as if navigating a nightmare, stepping over abandoned cups and around strangers who had claimed her space without permission or acknowledgement. In the kitchen, she found a group of young women she didn't recognize using her expensive French press to make coffee, grounds scattered across her marble countertop like evidence of casual destruction. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom, each step feeling heavier than the last. Behind her closed door, she could still hear the party continuing. Her house transformed into a playground for young people who saw her as invisible infrastructure, useful only for the services she provided. The sound of breaking glass drifted up from downstairs, followed by laughter and shouts of mock concern. Agnes sat on the edge of her bed, still clutching her book club materials, and tried to process the magnitude of her son's betrayal. Not just the words themselves, though they cut deeply enough, but the casual confidence with which he'd delivered them. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment or a cruel joke taken too far. This was how he actually saw her. As hired help who happened to live in the same house, whose emotional investment in his well-being was irrelevant to the transactional nature of their relationship. She thought of the pot roast cooling in the refrigerator, prepared for a son who viewed her as domestic staff, the clean sheets on his bed, changed by someone he considered essentially interchangeable with paid help, the carefully packed lunches, the managed schedule, the bills paid and groceries purchased and laundry folded, all of it reduced to the services of live-in help, who was useful primarily because she worked without compensation. The noise from downstairs swelled and receded like waves, punctuated by occasional crashes and shouts. Through her bedroom window she could see neighbors, houses where other families lived their orderly lives, parents and children bound by relationships of mutual respect and acknowledged care. The contrast felt like a knife turning in her chest. Agnes opened her nightstand drawer and pulled out the travel brochures, their glossy surfaces now seeming less like impossible dreams, and more like evidence of a life she'd abandoned for someone who saw her as barely more than a convenience. The European river cruise, the writing retreat in Maine, the senior community with its promise of dignity and autonomy, all of it sacrificed for a relationship that existed primarily in her own heart. She spread the brochures across her comforter once more, but this time the calculation felt different. Not wistful dreaming, but practical planning. Not someday, but soon. The sound of her grandfather clock drifted upstairs, marking time that belonged to her. Time she'd been giving away to someone who neither valued it nor even acknowledged its cost. The party continued below, her house transformed into foreign territory by young people who treated her life's work as invisible background noise. But Agnes Steven sat in the quiet of her bedroom and felt something fundamental shifting inside her chest. Not breaking exactly, but crystallizing into something harder and more determined than the patient maternal devotion that had defined her for so long. By morning she would have a plan. Agnes remained motionless on her bed until the grandfather clock chimed midnight, the sound cutting through the diminishing noise from downstairs like a signal of transition. The party was winding down now. She could hear car doors slamming, engines starting, the gradual exodus of young people who had consumed her hospitality without acknowledgement or gratitude. By 12:30, the house had returned to its familiar silence, broken only by Danny's footsteps on the stairs and the closing of his bedroom door. She waited another hour before moving, ensuring he was truly asleep before beginning the work that would reshape both their lives. Agnes opened her laptop and settled into the reading chair beside her bedroom window, the screen's blue glow illuminating her face with the cold light of transformation. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with the methodical precision of someone approaching a complex problem from multiple angles. First, she researched rental rates for comparable properties in Maple Grove Estates. A furnished bedroom in a 4-bedroom colonial, utilities included, averaged $850 per month. She bookmarked 3 different rental websites and created a spreadsheet, cross-referencing square footage, amenities, and location factors. The marketing executive, who had been dormant for 20 years, awakened in her methodical approach to data collection. She calculated utility usage, dividing the monthly electric, gas, and water bills by square footage to determine Danny's proportional consumption. Internet service, cable television, household insurance, each expense dissected and allocated with the precision of someone building an irrefutable case. Agnes moved to domestic service rates next, her research revealing an entire economy of labor she had been providing for free. House cleaning services in their area charged $35 per hour, with deep cleaning running $50. Laundry and ironing services averaged $2.50 per pound. Personal shopping and meal preparation ranged from $25 to $45 per hour, depending on complexity and dietary requirements. She opened a new document and began itemizing Danny's daily consumption of her services. Morning breakfast preparation, 30 minutes at $35 per hour, calculating to $17.50 per day. Lunch preparation and packing, 15 minutes, $8.75. Laundry collection, washing, drying, folding, and delivery to his room, 2 hours per week at professional rates, $70 weekly, or $280 monthly. Room cleaning, including sheet changing and organization, 1 hour weekly at deep cleaning rates, $200 monthly. The numbers accumulated with devastating clarity. Agnes had been providing approximately $1.400 worth of services monthly, not including the countless small tasks that comprised the invisible infrastructure of Danny's comfort. Managing his appointments, maintaining his car registration, coordinating his academic schedule, serving as his personal administrative assistant. She pulled up lease agreement templates online, selecting a comprehensive residential rental contract from a legal document website. Her divorced woman's instinct, sharpened by Elena's legal advice, prompted her to choose the most formal and binding version available. Agnes began customizing the template, replacing generic language with specific terms tailored to their situation. Residential lease agreement, she typed, between Agnes Steven, landlord, and Daniel Steven, tenant, for the rental of 1 furnished bedroom with shared common areas at 142 Sycamore Drive, Maple Grove Estates. The monthly rent, she determined, would be $750, slightly below market rate, but reasonable for the amenities provided. She added clauses for utilities, $150 monthly, internet and cable access, $45 monthly, and a mandatory meal plan, $300 monthly for breakfast, lunch preparation, and 3 dinners per week. Optional services, additional cleaning, laundry, personal shopping would be billed separately at prevailing market rates. Agnes included a security deposit requirement of $1,000, standard late fees for overdue rent, and a 30-day notice requirement for lease termination. She added specific house rules: no unauthorized guests, no parties without prior written consent, shared spaces to be maintained in clean condition, quiet hours from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. The transformation felt both surreal and inevitable as she worked through the document. Each clause represented a boundary she had never established, a protection for herself that she had never considered necessary. The woman who had spent 20 years prioritizing everyone else's needs was systematically claiming space for her own value and dignity. By 3 a.m., Agnes had created a comprehensive packet: the lease agreement, an itemized breakdown of service costs, a schedule of optional services with rates, and a calculated bill for the previous month's services rendered. She printed everything on her best letterhead, remnants from her consulting work that bore her name in elegant serif font. Sleep came fitfully, her dreams filled with spreadsheets and legal documents, numbers marching across her consciousness like soldiers in formation. She woke before her alarm, dressed with particular care in her most professional attire, a navy blazer and tailored pants that recalled her executive days, and descended to the kitchen to prepare what would be Danny's last free breakfast. Agnes arranged the documents in a leather portfolio beside his usual place setting. She prepared his eggs exactly as he preferred them, brewed his coffee to the precise strength he favored, and packed his lunch with the mechanical perfection of someone performing a familiar ritual for the final time. The pot roast from the previous evening remained untouched in the refrigerator, a small monument to the casual disregard that had finally pushed her beyond the boundaries of maternal martyrdom. Danny appeared at 7:15, his hair still bearing the disheveled stamp of sleep, his movements carrying the careful deliberation of someone managing a mild hangover. He noticed neither her formal attire nor the portfolio beside his plate, reaching immediately for his coffee and scrolling through his phone with practiced indifference. "Good morning, Danny." Agnes's voice carried a different quality this morning, not the warm maternal tone he was accustomed to, but something cooler and more measured. "Morning." His response was automatic, attention still fixed on the small screen. Agnes waited until he had taken his first bite of eggs, before sliding the portfolio across the table. "I have some paperwork for you to review." Danny glanced up with mild curiosity, still chewing. "What kind of paperwork?" "A lease agreement." Agnes settled into her chair across from him, her hands folded with the composure of someone conducting a business meeting, along with a bill for services rendered and a schedule of rates going forward. The confusion on his face was immediate and genuine. "What are you talking about?" Agnes opened the portfolio and extracted the lease agreement, placing it directly in front of him. "Since you've made it clear that you view me as live-in help rather than your mother, I've decided to formalize our arrangement accordingly. This lease covers your rental of the bedroom upstairs, with associated costs for utilities, meals, and services." Danny stared at the document as if it were written in a foreign language. "This is a joke, right?" "I'm completely serious." Agnes's voice remained steady, professional. "The base rent is $750 per month, which is actually below market rate for a furnished room in this neighborhood. Utilities, meals, and basic cleaning services are itemized separately. Optional services like laundry and personal shopping will be billed at prevailing market rates." "Mom, what the hell? I prefer you use my name Agnes, since we're now operating on a business basis." She extracted the itemized bill for previous services and placed it beside the lease. "This covers the past month's services rendered. I've been quite generous with my rates, charging substantially less than comparable service providers in the area." Danny pushed back from the table, his coffee forgotten. "This is insane. You're my mother, not my landlord." Agnes met his gaze with the calm directness of someone who had spent the night calculating her worth in precise numerical terms. "Last night you referred to me as just the live-in help. If that's how you see our relationship, then I'm simply ensuring you receive professional quality service at fair market rates." "I didn't mean, that was just." Danny's voice carried the first note of genuine distress she had heard from him in months. "I was just talking to my friends." "Yes, you were. And now I know exactly how you value my contributions to your daily life." Agnes rose from her chair with the measured dignity of someone concluding a business meeting. "The lease requires your signature by this evening, along with the first month's rent and security deposit. If you prefer to find alternative arrangements, that's certainly your choice." Danny stared at the documents as if they might disappear through focused attention. "You can't be serious about this." "I've never been more serious about anything in my life." Agnes began clearing the breakfast dishes with mechanical efficiency. "Your rent is due on the 1st of each month. Late fees apply after the 5th. If you have questions about the terms, I suggest you review the documentation carefully." The silence stretched between them, punctuated only by the sound of dishes being loaded into the dishwasher and the grandfather clock's measured ticking. Danny remained frozen at the table, the lease agreement open before him like a roadmap to a destination he couldn't comprehend. Agnes wiped down the counter with her usual thoroughness, but the familiar domestic ritual now carried the weight of professional service rather than maternal care. When she finished, She turned back to face her son, or rather, her prospective tenant, with the composed expression of someone who had finally learned to value her own labor appropriately. "I'll need your decision by 6 o'clock this evening," she said, removing her apron and hanging it on its designated hook. "If you choose not to sign the lease, I'll require 30 days notice to vacate the premises, as outlined in the standard rental agreement." Danny opened his mouth as if to respond, then closed it again, apparently unable to formulate words adequate to this fundamental shift in their relationship. Agnes gathered her purse and car keys, preparing to leave for errands that would now be conducted with the satisfaction of someone whose time and effort had finally been assigned appropriate monetary value. "Have a good day at school, Danny." The words carried none of their usual maternal warmth, delivered instead with the professional courtesy of a service provider addressing a client. "I'll see you this evening for your decision." Agnes walked toward the garage, leaving her son alone with the documentation of her newly quantified worth and the devastating precision of boundaries he had never imagined she possessed. Behind her, the grandfather clock continued its measured counting of time that now belonged entirely to her, each chime marking the transformation of love into business and sacrifice into self-respect. The morning air felt different as she backed out of the driveway, carrying the weight of decisions that would reshape not just their living arrangement, but the fundamental nature of their relationship. Agnes Steven was no longer invisible help. She was a landlord, a service provider, and, for the first time in decades, a woman who demanded fair compensation for her considerable value. Danny remained frozen at the kitchen table long after Agnes's car had pulled out of the driveway, the lease agreement spread before him like evidence of his mother's complete psychological break. The familiar kitchen around him, with its carefully arranged coffee station, spotless countertops, and refrigerator humming with perfectly organized contents, suddenly felt like foreign territory, marked by legal boundaries he couldn't comprehend. He read through the documents 3 times, each pass revealing new layers of his mother's calculated transformation from nurturing caregiver to business operator. The rental rate, utility charges, meal plan costs, and service fees had been researched and itemized with the precision of someone who had spent considerable time quantifying every aspect of his daily comfort. The woman who had kissed his forehead and worried about his sociology grade had become someone who charged $2.50 per pound for laundry services. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Danny's first instinct was dismissal. This was obviously some kind of elaborate maternal guilt trip, a theatrical performance designed to make him appreciate her contributions. He would apologize for his thoughtless comment at the party, express gratitude for her care, and things would return to their normal rhythm. The lease agreement would disappear into whatever psychological crisis had prompted its creation, and his mother would resume her invisible maintenance of his daily life. But when he opened the refrigerator to retrieve ingredients for a sandwich, he found a small padlock securing the main compartment, with only a single shelf marked "Danny paid through today," containing a container of leftover eggs and a half-empty carton of orange juice. A laminated sign explained the new protocol. Food access requires current meal plan payment or individual purchase at market rates. See rate schedule for details. The absurdity of his own mother padlocking food from him sparked the first genuine anger he had felt since finding the lease agreement. Danny searched the kitchen drawers for bolt cutters or any tool that might remove the ridiculous impediment to his breakfast routine, but Agnes had apparently anticipated this response. The padlock was substantial, professional grade, the kind used by storage facilities and commercial establishments. His phone buzzed with a text from Jake Morrison. "Dude, epic party last night, your mom cool with all that?" Danny stared at the message, remembering with uncomfortable clarity his casual dismissal of Agnes as live-in help. The words that had seemed clever and mature in front of his friends now carried the weight of consequences he couldn't have imagined. He typed and deleted several responses before settling on, "Yeah, all good." By noon, Danny had discovered the comprehensive nature of his mother's business transformation. The internet password had been changed, requiring a daily access code that would be provided upon payment of his technology usage fee. His bedroom thermostat had been locked at 65 degrees, with a note explaining that temperature adjustments required utility payment. The laundry room door bore a new sign, Professional laundry services. Payment required before processing. No exceptions. The basket of dirty clothes in his room, shirts that smelled of last night's party, jeans grass-stained from the previous weekend's outdoor activities, sat as evidence of his complete dependence on services he had never consciously acknowledged. Danny had attempted laundry exactly twice in his life, both times producing disasters that his mother had quietly corrected without complaint or instruction. He spent the afternoon attempting basic tasks that had previously been managed by Agnes's invisible labor. Cooking proved immediately problematic when he realized that knowing how to heat frozen pizza didn't translate to preparing actual meals from basic ingredients. His attempt at scrambled eggs resulted in a pan burned black and smoke that triggered the kitchen's fire alarm. The bread he tried to toast emerged as charcoal, filling the house with the acrid smell of his domestic incompetence. The washing machine presented its own challenges. Danny loaded his clothes without sorting, added what seemed like a reasonable amount of detergent, and selected a cycle at random. The resulting foam explosion that flooded the laundry room floor felt like his mother's house actively resisting his occupation. He mopped the mess with towels that immediately became soaked, creating a secondary disaster he had no idea how to address properly. By 4 p.m., Jake Morrison had arrived for their planned study session, finding Danny surrounded by the evidence of his failed attempts at basic self-sufficiency. The kitchen bore the scorched remains of his cooking experiments, the laundry room smelled of chemical excess and dampness, and Danny himself appeared disheveled and increasingly desperate. "Dude, what happened here?" Jake surveyed the chaos with the casual cruelty of someone who had never questioned where clean clothes and prepared meals originated. "Did your cleaning lady quit or something?" Danny felt heat rise in his chest, though whether from embarrassment or anger he couldn't distinguish. "My mother decided to." He gestured helplessly at the lease agreement, still lying on the kitchen table like a legal verdict. "She wants me to pay rent, and for food, and laundry." Jake picked up the documents, reading with the dramatic expression of someone encountering an entertaining absurdity. "Holy shit, Danny. Your mom went full psycho landlord on you." He laughed, but the sound carried an edge of nervous discomfort. "What did you do to piss her off this much?" The question hit Danny with uncomfortable precision. He remembered his careless words from the night before, just the live-in help, delivered with the confident dismissiveness of someone who had never considered their impact. The laughter of his friends, their easy agreement with his characterization of his mother as essentially disposable domestic infrastructure. "I don't know," Danny lied, though the memory of Agnes's face when she had presented the lease agreement suggested she knew exactly what had prompted this transformation. "She's been weird since the divorce." Jake continued reading, his expression shifting from amusement to something approaching respect. "These rates are actually pretty reasonable. I mean, if you were renting from anyone else, you'd pay way more than this." He looked around the chaos of the kitchen with new appreciation. "Your mom's been doing all this stuff for free? Like every day?" The observation forced Danny to inventory his daily consumption of services he had never considered labor. The breakfast that appeared without request, perfectly prepared to his preferences. The lunch packed with consideration for his dietary needs and schedule. The clothes that moved from dirty hamper to clean closet through some domestic magic he had never questioned. The bills paid, appointments managed, car maintained, room cleaned, all of it flowing seamlessly around his life like invisible infrastructure. "She can't actually make me pay this," Danny said, though his voice carried less conviction than he intended. "I mean, I'm her son. This is my home." Jake shrugged, apparently losing interest in the domestic drama. "Whatever, man. Can we use your laptop for this psych paper?" "The Wi-Fi password isn't working." Danny realized with sinking certainty that he would have to pay for internet access before they could complete their assignment. The psychology paper that was due Friday morning, worth 30% of his grade, hung in the balance of his decision about the lease agreement. His part-time job at the campus bookstore paid $12 per hour for 15 hours per week, approximately $720 per month before taxes. The base rent alone would consume most of his income, leaving nothing for food, utilities, or any semblance of his previous social life. The grandfather clock chimed 5 p.m., its sound carrying new significance as a countdown to Agnes's 6 o'clock deadline. Danny had spent the day discovering the vast scope of his dependence on labor he had dismissed as essentially worthless. Every basic task revealed new layers of skill and attention he had never developed, competencies his mother had quietly maintained while he focused on what he considered the more important aspects of his life. Jake gathered his materials with visible frustration at the Wi-Fi situation. "Text me when you get this sorted out. We can work on the paper at my place if your mom doesn't back down from this crazy landlord thing." After Jake left, Danny sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of his failed attempts at self-sufficiency. The lease agreement lay open before him, each clause representing a boundary he had never imagined his mother might establish. The woman who had sacrificed her career, her marriage, and apparently her retirement dreams to maintain his comfort had calculated her worth in precise numerical terms and presented him with a bill he couldn't afford to pay. The grandfather clock's ticking seemed louder now, marking time that belonged to someone who had finally learned to value her own labor appropriately. Danny stared at the signature line on the lease agreement, understanding for the first time that his mother, the woman he had casually dismissed as live-in help, held all the power in their relationship and had simply chosen never to use it until now. 1 hour remained until Agnes's deadline, and Danny Steven was beginning to understand the true cost of taking love for granted. The grandfather clock struck 5:30 as Danny stared at his phone, his thumb hovering over Professor Kim's contact information. Sarah Kim had been his developmental psychology instructor for 2 semesters, and unlike most of his professors, she seemed genuinely interested in her students as complete human beings, rather than just academic units. During office hours, she had a way of asking questions that forced him to examine his own behavior patterns with uncomfortable clarity. He scrolled past her number and dialed his father instead. "Danny!" Marcus Stevens' voice carried the forced enthusiasm of someone performing parental interest rather than feeling it. Background noise suggested he was in a restaurant or bar, probably with Chloe, his 35-year-old girlfriend who was closer to Danny's age than his own. "What's up, sport?" "Dad, I need some advice about something weird Mom is doing." Danny found himself pacing the kitchen, stepping over the towels still damp from his laundry room disaster. "She is trying to make me sign a lease agreement to live in my own house. Like, actual rent and everything." The silence stretched long enough that Danny wondered if the call had dropped. When Marcus finally responded, his voice had shifted to something more guarded. "A lease agreement? What brought that on?" Danny felt heat rise in his chest as he recounted the events, carefully omitting his love-in help comment, while emphasizing what he characterized as his mother's sudden irrational behavior. As he spoke, he realized how the situation sounded from an outside perspective. A grown woman demanding payment from her college-age son for basic family obligations seemed increasingly unreasonable when presented as pure fact. "Look, Danny," Marcus's voice carried the weary tone of someone who had navigated Agnes's moods for 23 years of marriage. "Your mother has been going through a lot since the divorce. Sometimes women her age get ideas about independence and their worth. It's probably just a phase." The casual dismissiveness in his father's voice, women her age, made Danny uncomfortable in ways he couldn't articulate. "So you think she'll back down if I just ignore it?" "Agnes has always been dramatic about domestic stuff. Remember when she went on that cleaning strike when you were in high school? Lasted about a week before she couldn't stand the mess anymore." Marcus's laugh carried no warmth. "Give her some space to cool off. She'll realize how ridiculous this whole landlord thing is." After hanging up, Danny felt less reassured than he had hoped. His father's advice seemed to dismiss the calculated precision of Agnes's lease agreement, the professional quality of her research and documentation. This didn't feel like a dramatic gesture or emotional outburst. It felt like a business decision made by someone who had carefully considered all available options. Meanwhile, Agnes sat in Elena Rodriguez's law office, the lease agreement spread across the mahogany conference table between them. Elena had insisted on reviewing the documentation immediately after Agnes's frantic phone call, canceling her evening plans to provide what she suspected would be crisis intervention for her oldest friend. "Legally, this is airtight," Elena said, adjusting her reading glasses as she finished examining the rental agreement. You've researched market rates, included standard clauses, followed proper formatting. If Danny were any other 19-year-old, I'd tell him to sign immediately, 'cause he's getting an incredible deal. Agnes leaned forward, searching Elena's expression for judgment or concern. But he's not any other 19-year-old. He's my son. Which makes this either brilliant parenting or potentially devastating to your relationship. Elena set the papers down with the careful precision of someone delivering a difficult diagnosis. Agnes, I support what you're doing. God knows that boy has taken you for granted long enough. But I have to ask, what's your end goal here? Are you trying to teach him a lesson? Or have you fundamentally changed how you want to relate to him? The question hung between them like a challenge Agnes hadn't fully considered. She had spent the previous night focused on the mechanics of her transformation, calculating rates, drafting agreements, establishing boundaries, without examining the emotional destination of this new dynamic. I want him to respect me, Agnes said finally. I want him to see that what I do has value, that I'm more than invisible infrastructure in his life. And if he can't afford the rent? If he chooses to move out rather than pay? Agnes felt her chest tighten at the possibility she had been avoiding all day. Then at least I'll know where I stand. At least I'll have my dignity intact. Elena leaned back in her chair, studying her friend with the analytical gaze that had made her successful in family law. Agnes, dignity shouldn't require financial transactions within families. If Danny can't see your value without a price tag attached, what does that say about the foundation you've built your relationship on? The observation stung because it carried truth Agnes wasn't ready to examine. She had spent 19 years trying to earn love through service, to prove her worth through indispensability. The lease agreement represented not just a demand for respect, but an admission that love alone hadn't been sufficient to secure it. Maybe the foundation was flawed from the beginning, Agnes said quietly. While Agnes grappled with Elena's difficult questions, Danny found himself standing on Professor Kim's office threshold at 6:15, having sprinted across campus after finally gathering the courage to seek academic counsel. Sarah Kim looked up from grading papers, taking in his disheveled appearance and obvious distress. Danny? What's wrong? She gestured to the chair across from her desk, her voice carrying the calm authority that had made her his favorite instructor. Danny collapsed into the chair and began explaining the situation, this time including his careless comment about live-in help that had precipitated his mother's business transformation. As he spoke, Professor Kim's expression shifted from concern to something approaching clinical interest. So your mother heard you refer to her as hired help, and she's decided to formalize that relationship with appropriate compensation. Professor Kim summarized when he finished. From a family systems perspective, this is actually a fascinating response to boundary violations and power imbalances. Danny stared at her, having expected sympathy rather than academic analysis. It's fascinating. She's trying to charge me rent to live in my own house. Is it your house, Danny? Professor Kim's voice carried the gentle challenge she used when guiding students toward uncomfortable self-examination. Who holds the deed? Who pays the mortgage, utilities, maintenance, taxes? The questions forced Danny to confront assumptions he had never examined. The house had always simply been there, a stable backdrop to his life that required no consideration of ownership or financial responsibility. His mother's name was on the mortgage, the insurance, the property taxes, legal realities that had never penetrated his consciousness because they were managed by the same invisible labor he had dismissed so casually. But she's my mother, he said, the words sounding increasingly hollow even to himself. Yes, she is. And what obligations do you believe that creates? For her toward you, and for you toward her. Danny found himself unable to articulate expectations he had never consciously formed. He had operated on the assumption that maternal love created unlimited obligation, that Agnes owed him care, support, and domestic service simply by virtue of having given birth to him. The reciprocal obligations of that relationship had never occurred to him. I don't understand why she's being so cold about this, Danny said finally. She's never acted like my gratitude mattered before. Professor Kim leaned forward, her voice taking on the gentle firmness she used for particularly important lessons. Danny, have you ever expressed gratitude for your mother's daily care? Have you ever acknowledged the scope of what she provides? Or have you treated it as invisible because it was always there? The question hit him like a physical blow. Danny tried to remember the last time he had thanked his mother for anything beyond birthday gifts or special occasions. Her daily labor, the meals, clean clothes, managed schedule, maintained household, had been so consistent, so seamlessly provided, that it had become as invisible as breathing. As Agnes walked home from Elena's office, she noticed Mrs. Patterson tending to her evening garden, the elderly woman's careful movements among her roses visible in the porch light. On impulse, Agnes crossed the street to greet her neighbor. "Agnes, dear." Mrs. Patterson straightened slowly, her 78-year-old frame moving with the deliberate care of someone preserving limited energy. "I couldn't help but notice some unusual activity at your house lately. Is everything all right?" Agnes found herself explaining the situation to someone who had observed family dynamics for decades, who had raised 4 children through their own struggles with independence and entitlement. Mrs. Patterson listened without interruption, nodding occasionally with the wisdom of someone who had navigated similar challenges. "My youngest son, Robert, was 32 when I finally told him he couldn't live in my basement anymore," Mrs. Patterson said when Agnes finished. "He called me selfish, accused me of not loving him. But you know what happened? He got his own apartment, learned to do his own laundry, and started appreciating our relationship instead of just consuming it." Agnes felt validation wash over her like relief. "Did your relationship recover?" "It became better than it had ever been, because it was finally balanced. He stopped seeing me as a service provider, and started seeing me as a person with my own needs and limitations." Mrs. Patterson's smile carried the satisfaction of someone who had successfully navigated difficult but necessary changes. "Sometimes love requires boundaries, Agnes. Sometimes respect has to be demanded before it can be freely given." As Agnes continued home, she felt more confident in her decision, but also more aware of its potential costs. Elena's questions about long-term consequences echoed in her mind, balanced against Mrs. Patterson's reassurance that difficult changes sometimes led to stronger relationships. She found Danny waiting in the kitchen, the signed lease agreement on the table beside a check for the first month's rent and security deposit. His face carried the exhaustion of someone who had spent hours confronting uncomfortable truths about himself and his assumptions. "Professor Kim helped me understand some things," he said quietly, as Agnes reviewed the documents. "About boundaries and respect and what I've been taking for granted." Agnes looked up from the paperwork, seeing something different in her son's expression. Not the casual entitlement she had grown accustomed to, but the beginning of genuine recognition. The support network they had both consulted had provided different perspectives, but all pointing toward the same difficult truth. Their relationship had been fundamentally imbalanced, and change, however uncomfortable, was necessary for both of them. The grandfather clock chimed 7:30, marking not just the passage of time, but the beginning of a new dynamic, built on acknowledged value rather than invisible sacrifice. 2 weeks into the lease arrangement, Danny Steven stared at his bank balance with the growing horror of someone watching a slow-motion disaster unfold in real time. The glowing numbers on his phone screen told a story of financial mathematics he had never been forced to confront. $347. 82 remaining after rent, security deposit, and the first 2 weeks of meal plans. His next paycheck from the campus bookstore wouldn't arrive for another week, and even that $180 after taxes wouldn't bridge the gap between his income and his newly quantified living expenses. He sat in the campus coffee shop where he had once spent $15 without consideration, nursing a single black coffee, the cheapest item on the menu at $2.75. Around him, his classmates ordered elaborate specialty drinks and pastries with the casual indifference of young people whose financial support remained invisible and unlimited. Jake Morrison had texted 3 times about weekend plans that involved restaurants and bars Danny could no longer afford, each invitation highlighting the growing gulf between his new reality and his previous assumptions about disposable income. The meal plan Agnes had established proved both reasonable and restrictive. Breakfast appeared each morning, prepared to his preferences, but limited to the predetermined menu she had calculated into the monthly cost. Lunch remained packed and ready, but additional snacks or spontaneous food purchases required separate payment from his dwindling resources. Dinner was provided 3 times per week, with the remaining evenings requiring his own planning and procurement, a challenge that had resulted in a diet of ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches. Danny pulled out his laptop and opened a spreadsheet he had created to track his expenses with the obsessive attention of someone learning financial reality through crisis. Rent, $750. Utilities, $150. Meal plan, $300. Phone bill, $65. Paid automatically from his account. Gas for his car, approximately $120 monthly. The numbers added up to $1,385, nearly double his monthly income from the bookstore. His first instinct had been to find additional employment, but the campus job market proved as unforgiving as his budget calculations. The dining services position he applied for required weekend shifts that conflicted with his study schedule. The tutoring center offered only 10 hours per week at $13 per hour, insufficient to bridge his financial gap. A retail position at the mall would provide more hours but require a 40-minute commute that would consume both time and gas money he couldn't afford. The social implications of his reduced circumstances became apparent gradually, then all at once. When Jake invited him to the new seafood restaurant near campus, Danny found himself calculating whether the estimated cost would prevent him from paying his next utility bill. When his psychology study group suggested meeting at the upscale coffee shop downtown, he proposed the library instead, claiming preference for the quiet environment rather than admitting he couldn't afford their specialty drinks. Most painfully, he had been forced to decline Jake's invitation to a weekend ski trip, an annual tradition that would have cost $400 for lodging, lift tickets, and meals. The excuse he offered about academic commitments sounded hollow even to himself, and Jake's response carried the subtle disappointment of someone realizing their friend could no longer participate in their shared lifestyle. Danny's relationship with money transformed from abstract convenience to immediate, pressing concern. He found himself checking prices at the grocery store when shopping for his non-meal plan dinners, discovering that the organic products Agnes typically purchased cost significantly more than the generic alternatives he now required. The difference between name-brand and store-brand items, previously invisible to his awareness, became critical factors in his ability to eat adequately. The laundry situation proved particularly challenging. Agnes's professional rates, $70 weekly for full service, exceeded his entire discretionary budget, forcing him to learn skills he had never developed. His attempts at washing clothes had improved marginally since the initial foam disaster, but he remained unable to achieve the crisp cleanliness and proper care that Agnes had provided invisibly for years. His shirts emerged wrinkled, his jeans faded unevenly, and delicate items suffered damage that revealed his ignorance about fabric care and appropriate water temperatures. 3 weeks into the arrangement, Danny approached Agnes about payment plans and budget flexibility. He found her in her study, formerly the spare bedroom she had claimed as personal space since establishing the lease agreement, reviewing what appeared to be consulting work from her old marketing firm. "Mom, Agnes," he corrected himself, still struggling with the formality their business relationship required. "I was hoping we could discuss the payment terms for this month." Agnes looked up from her computer with the neutral expression she had maintained since their relationship became transactional. Her workspace reflected the professional identity she was reclaiming. Business books arranged on shelves, client files organized in labeled folders, a vision board featuring images of travel destinations and career opportunities. "What specifically did you want to discuss?" Danny settled into the chair across from her desk, feeling like a client seeking loan modification from a bank. "My income doesn't quite cover all the expenses right now. I was wondering if we could work out a payment plan. Maybe reduce some of the services temporarily while I find additional work." Agnes leaned back in her chair, studying him with the analytical gaze of someone evaluating a business proposal. "Which services would you like to eliminate? Maybe the meal plan? I could handle my own food shopping and cooking." Danny's voice carried more confidence than he felt about his culinary capabilities. "That would save you $300 monthly," Agnes acknowledged. "However, you'd need to provide your own groceries, cooking equipment, and cleaning supplies. You'd also be responsible for kitchen cleanup after each meal. and any damage to appliances or cookware would be billed separately. Danny nodded eagerly, though the prospect of managing his own nutrition felt overwhelming. What about laundry? Maybe I could do that myself, too. Certainly. You'd need to purchase your own detergent, fabric softener, and stain removal products. You'd also be responsible for any damage to the washer or dryer from improper use, and for deep cleaning if you create another foam situation. The conversation continued with Agnes outlining the true costs of each service he proposed to eliminate. What had appeared as potential savings revealed themselves as expenses he hadn't considered, the hidden costs of independence that Agnes had been absorbing through her labor and expertise. By evening, Danny's calculations showed that eliminating services might actually increase his expenses once he factored in equipment, supplies, and his own inexperience. The meal plan, at $10 per day, proved cheaper than his attempts at independent grocery shopping, which resulted in food waste and impulsive purchases. The laundry service, while expensive, had been preventing damage to clothing that would cost more to replace than to maintain properly. The crisis reached its peak when Danny's utility payment came due, and his bank account balance showed $127.43, nearly $23 short of the required $150. He spent an entire evening calculating and recalculating, moving money between accounts, checking for forgotten deposits or overlooked income sources. The mathematics remained unforgiving. Agnes watched her son's struggles with emotions she couldn't fully untangle. The maternal instinct that had driven 20 years of caregiving warred with her commitment to the lesson she had determined necessary. When she found him at 2 a.m. hunched over his laptop in the kitchen, surrounded by financial documents and employment applications, she felt her resolve waver for the first time since implementing the lease arrangement. "Danny, what are you still doing up?" He looked up with red-rimmed eyes that reflected exhaustion and stress. "Trying to figure out how to pay utilities." "I'm short about $23. Agnes felt her chest tighten at the genuine distress in his voice. This was her child, the baby she had carried, the toddler she had comforted through nightmares, the teenager she had supported through academic struggles and social anxiety. The impulse to solve his problem immediately, to absorb the cost and remove his stress, rose with the powerful urgency of maternal love, but she also saw something else in his expression, the first real understanding of financial responsibility, the dawning recognition that money represented labor and time and careful management. For the first time in his life, Danny was confronting the economic realities that most adults navigated daily, the careful balance between income and expenses that shaped decisions about work, lifestyle, and priorities. "The utility bill is due tomorrow," Agnes said quietly. "I know. I'm going to call and see if I can set up a payment plan, maybe pay partial now, and the rest with my next paycheck." Agnes nodded, recognizing the problem-solving approach that represented genuine growth from the young man who had once expected her to handle all administrative challenges. "And if they won't agree to that?" Danny's shoulders sagged with the weight of consequences he was learning to anticipate. "Then I guess I lose power in my room until I can pay the full amount." The silence stretched between them, heavy with the recognition that their relationship had reached a crossroads neither had fully anticipated. Agnes could solve his immediate problem with a simple transfer of funds, returning to the invisible subsidization that had characterized their previous dynamic. Or she could maintain the boundaries that were teaching him difficult but necessary lessons about independence and the true cost of adult life. The grandfather clock chimed 2:30, marking time that belonged to both of them, mother and son, landlord and tenant, two people navigating the complex territory where love intersects with respect, and where financial independence becomes a measure of personal growth. The choice they made in the next few minutes would determine not just whether Danny's lights stayed on, but whether the painful lessons of the past month would continue toward genuine transformation or collapse back into comfortable codependence. The grandfather clock chimed 2:30 as Agnes stood in the doorway of her kitchen, watching her son calculate and recalculate numbers that wouldn't bend to his desperate mathematics. The $23 shortfall had become a chasm between them, not just financial, but emotional, representing everything their relationship had become and everything it had never been. "I'll call the utility company in the morning," Danny said finally, his voice carrying the hollow defeat of someone who had exhausted all options. "Maybe they'll let me pay half now." Agnes felt her resolve wavering as she watched him gather his papers with the careful movements of someone trying to maintain dignity in the face of failure. This was the lesson she had intended: that money represented labor, that comfort required planning, that respect must be earned rather than assumed. But watching her child struggle with consequences she had engineered felt like watching him drown, while holding a rope she refused to throw. "Good night, Danny," she managed, her voice tight with suppressed maternal instinct. "Good night, Agnes." 3 days later, Danny's utility payment remained unpaid, and the consequences had materialized exactly as threatened. His bedroom existed in darkness after sunset, lit only by the glow of his laptop screen and the hallway light that spilled under his door. He had moved his studying to the kitchen table, where shared spaces remained illuminated, but his nights were spent in the cold darkness of someone learning that warmth and light were commodities rather than rights. The stress had been building in his body like pressure behind a dam, sleepless nights spent calculating expenses, days filled with the careful management of limited resources. The constant mental mathematics of survival had worn him down to something fragile and vulnerable. When he woke Thursday morning with a scratchy throat and heavy limbs, Danny dismissed the symptoms as exhaustion and stress. By afternoon, the cold had developed into something more serious. His temperature spiked to 101. 3 degrees, his joints ached with the deep pain of genuine illness, and the cough that had started as throat irritation now produced concerning sounds from his chest. Danny sat in his darkened bedroom, shivering under blankets that felt inadequate against the fever chills, and realized with growing panic that he needed care he couldn't afford. Agnes had established her nursing rates with the same professional precision she had applied to all domestic services: $45 per hour for basic care, including temperature monitoring, medication administration, and meal preparation for illness. Intensive care, the round-the-clock attention that serious illness sometimes required, was billed at $60 per hour with a minimum 4-hour commitment. Danny's bank account showed $73.52. Even basic care for a single day would exceed his available resources, and intensive care remained completely beyond his financial reach. He lay in his cold, dark room, calculating whether he could survive whatever illness had taken hold without professional assistance, and whether his pride could withstand asking for charity from the woman whose services he had dismissed as worthless. From her study, Agnes heard the sounds of Danny's illness developing: the persistent cough that interrupted the house's quiet rhythm, the bathroom visits that occurred with increasing frequency, the absence of his usual movement through shared spaces. Her maternal radar, finely tuned by 20 years of monitoring his health and moods, registered each symptom with growing concern. She found herself pausing outside his bedroom door, listening to the labored breathing and occasional moans that suggested genuine distress rather than minor discomfort. The impulse to enter his room, to check his temperature and assess his condition, rose with overwhelming urgency. But the lease agreement hung between them like a legal barrier, transforming maternal instinct into professional obligation and care into commodity. Agnes retreated to her kitchen, where she prepared the soup she would have taken to any ill child, then stood staring at the bowl with the devastating recognition that offering it now would require payment or constitute breach of their business arrangement. The woman who had spent decades providing comfort without consideration was paralyzed by the transactional relationship she had created to protect her own dignity. By Friday morning, Danny's condition had worsened significantly. His fever spiked to 102.8 degrees, his cough had developed the wet, productive sound that suggested chest congestion, and he had been unable to keep food down since the previous evening. He lay in his darkened bedroom, alternating between fever sweats and violent chills, and realized with crystalline clarity that he needed medical attention he couldn't afford, and maternal care he had legally forfeited. The irony wasn't lost on him. The young man who had dismissed his mother as live-in help now desperately needed the very services he had characterized as worthless. But more devastating than the irony was the recognition that Agnes was honoring their business arrangement even as he suffered, that the woman who had once treated his minor sniffles with urgent attention was now maintaining professional boundaries while he battled genuine illness alone. Agnes stood outside his door at 10 a.m., listening to sounds that triggered every protective instinct she had developed as a mother. The raspy breathing, the occasional cry of distress, the ominous quiet that suggested either sleep or something more concerning. Her hand rested on the doorknob, trembling with the conflict between business obligation and maternal love. When she finally knocked, Danny's response came as a weak croak. "Come in." Agnes entered to find her son's room transformed into a sick chamber. Tissues scattered across surfaces, water glasses empty and abandoned. The air thick with the smell of fever and unwashed illness. Danny lay curled under insufficient blankets, his face flushed with fever but his lips pale with dehydration. "Danny, you need medical attention." He looked up at her with eyes that burned with fever and something approaching desperation. "I can't afford it." "The urgent care copay is $45, and if they want blood work or x-rays." His voice trailed off into coughing that shook his entire frame. Agnes felt her carefully constructed boundaries crumble in the face of her child's genuine suffering. The lease agreement, the service rates, the professional distance she had maintained, all of it dissolved in the presence of maternal terror at his condition. "Have you been taking anything for the fever?" "I took some Tylenol yesterday, but I threw it up." Danny's admission carried shame, along with physical misery. "I know I should pay for nursing care, but I don't have enough money left." The words hung between them like an indictment of everything their relationship had become. Agnes looked at her son, her child, regardless of legal arrangements or service contracts, and saw 20 years of love and sacrifice reduced to a transaction he couldn't afford. The woman who had birthed him, raised him, devoted her life to his well-being, had created barriers that prevented her from providing comfort when he needed it most. Agnes left the room and returned with her medical thermometer, a glass of ice water, fever reducers, and the bowl of soup that had been cooling on her kitchen counter. She set everything on his nightstand with the practiced efficiency of someone who had cared for sick children countless times. "Your temperature is 103.1, she announced after checking the thermometer. "This is beyond what you can manage alone." Danny stared at her with confusion and gratitude warring in his fevered expression. "Agnes, I can't pay for this." The formality of her chosen name in the context of his illness broke something fundamental in Agnes's chest. She sat on the edge of his bed, not a rented space in her property, and placed her hand on his forehead with the gentle touch that had comforted him through childhood nightmares and adolescent fears. "I'm not Agnes right now," she said quietly. "I'm your mother, and you're not my tenant. You're my son, and you're sick, and I don't give a damn about our lease agreement." Danny's eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with fever, and everything to do with the recognition of love that transcended business arrangements and wounded pride. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about what I said, about how I treated you, about everything." Agnes felt her own tears beginning as she looked at her child. Because that's what he was, regardless of age or legal documents or service contracts. "I'm sorry too. I'm sorry I let it get this far. I'm sorry I let business replace love, even temporarily." "I never knew," Danny whispered, his voice breaking with genuine remorse. "I never understood what you did, how much you sacrificed, how invisible I made you feel." Agnes helped him sit up enough to sip water and take fever medication, her hands moving with the muscle memory of maternal care that no contract could eliminate. "I made myself invisible. I thought if I was indispensable, I'd be valued. But indispensable and invisible are almost the same thing." They talked through the afternoon as Danny's fever began to break, both of them examining the relationship they had built on unspoken assumptions and unacknowledged obligations. Agnes admitted her fear that she had sacrificed her entire identity to motherhood, only to find that identity dismissed as worthless. Danny confronted his entitlement and the casual cruelty of taking love for granted. "I don't want you to be my landlord," Danny said as evening approached, his voice stronger but still weak from illness. "But I don't want to go back to taking you for granted either. I don't know how to find the balance." Agnes smoothed his blankets with the tender attention that had once been automatic but had become complicated by contracts and payment schedules. "Neither do I. But maybe we can figure it out together, as people who love each other rather than as business partners." The grandfather clock chimed 6 p.m., marking not just the passage of time, but the collapse of artificial boundaries that had threatened to destroy what they both valued most. The lease agreement still lay signed on the kitchen table, but its significance had shifted from legal document to reminder of how easily love could be obscured by pride, and how quickly relationships could be reduced to transactions when respect was demanded rather than freely given. As Agnes prepared to spend the night monitoring Danny's recovery, she understood that their crisis had revealed something essential about the foundation of their relationship. That love, when healthy, created its own economy of care and gratitude, respect and reciprocity. The challenge would be building that economy together, consciously and deliberately, rather than assuming it would emerge automatically from blood and obligation. Danny's fever broke completely during the night, and by Saturday morning he was sitting up in bed with something approaching normal color in his cheeks. Agnes had dozed fitfully in the chair beside his bed, waking every hour to check his temperature and monitor his breathing, with the vigilance of someone who had spent decades managing the minor crises of childhood illness. The lease agreement remained on the kitchen table, its formal language now seeming like artifacts from a different relationship entirely. "Mom," Danny said as she stirred from her latest brief sleep, the word carrying weight it hadn't held in months. "We need to talk about how to fix this." Agnes straightened in the chair, studying her son's face for signs of lingering fever or the casual dismissiveness that had characterized their recent interactions. She found neither. Instead, she saw something new in his expression, a gravity that suggested genuine consideration of complex problems rather than the expectation that someone else would solve them. "What do you want to fix?" Danny pushed himself up against his pillows, wincing slightly at the lingering muscle aches from his illness. "Everything. The way I treated you, the way I never saw what you were doing, the way I made you feel invisible in your own life." He paused, gathering thoughts that seemed to have been forming throughout his recovery. "But I also don't want to go back to the way things were, where I was just taking and you were just giving without any recognition." Agnes felt something cautious and hopeful stirring in her chest. "What are you suggesting?" "I want to renegotiate, not as landlord and tenant but as..." Danny struggled with language that could encompass their complex relationship. As family members who respect each other's contributions and needs. Over the next several hours, they had the kind of conversation that had been absent from their relationship for years, honest, direct, and focused on mutual understanding, rather than maintaining comfortable assumptions. Danny admitted the scope of his financial limitations, acknowledging that his part-time income couldn't support the full market rates Agnes had established. Agnes expressed her need for recognition and appreciation, but also her desire to maintain their family bond, rather than reducing everything to business transactions. "I calculated what I actually earned per month after taxes," Danny said, showing her the spreadsheet he had created during his financial crisis. "It's about $620. I can reasonably contribute $400 monthly to household expenses without completely destroying my ability to participate in college life." Agnes reviewed his figures with the analytical attention she had once brought to marketing budgets. "That wouldn't cover full rent at market rates." "No, but it would cover a fair contribution to utilities, groceries, and some household services." Danny leaned forward, his expression earnest in a way she hadn't seen since he was much younger. "I was thinking, what if instead of paying you for everything, I took over some of the work myself? Like, I could do my own laundry completely, handle all the grocery shopping, take over lawn maintenance, maybe cook dinner twice a week?" Agnes considered the proposal, recognizing both its practical merit and its symbolic significance. Danny was offering to contribute labor, rather than simply consuming it, to become a participant in household maintenance, rather than its beneficiary. "You've never successfully cooked a complete meal," she pointed out. "Then I'll learn. I'll take a cooking class if necessary, or start with simple things and work up to more complex meals." Danny's voice carried determination rather than the casual confidence of someone making promises he didn't intend to keep. "I know I've been incompetent at basic life skills, but that's because I never had to learn them. I want to learn them." They spent the afternoon negotiating the details of what Danny began calling their family partnership agreement, a framework that acknowledged both Agnes's need for appreciation and Danny's desire to contribute meaningfully to their shared life. Rather than formal rent, Danny would pay $350 monthly as his contribution to household expenses. In exchange, Agnes would continue providing breakfasts and 3 dinners per week, while Danny would handle his own lunches, weekend meals, and snacks. Danny would take complete responsibility for his own laundry, learning proper care techniques for different fabrics and maintaining the equipment he used. He would handle all grocery shopping, working from lists they created together, but managing the entire procurement process independently. Yard work would become his domain: mowing, trimming, leaf removal, and basic landscaping maintenance that would save Agnes both physical effort and the cost of professional services. "I want to contribute to your personal goals too," Danny said, as they refined their agreement. "Not just to household maintenance, but to the life you want to build for yourself." Agnes looked up from their notes, surprised by the mature consideration behind his words. "What do you mean?" "Those travel brochures in your drawer, the consulting work you've been doing, the things you've been putting off because you felt obligated to manage every detail of my life." Danny's voice carried a note of regret that seemed genuine rather than performative. "I want you to feel free to pursue those things without worrying about whether I can take care of myself." The conversation that followed revealed how differently they had been viewing Agnes's sacrifice. She had seen her domestic labor as expressions of love that deserved acknowledgement, while Danny had perceived them as natural maternal obligations that required no particular gratitude. Neither perspective had been entirely accurate, and both had contributed to the fundamental imbalance that had nearly destroyed their relationship. "I need you to understand that I'm 63 years old," Agnes said finally, her voice carrying the weight of time consciousness that had been building since her divorce. "I don't have unlimited years to devote to maintaining someone else's life. If I'm going to continue providing significant support, I need to know that you see me as a complete person with my own dreams and limitations." Danny nodded with the seriousness of someone receiving important information rather than listening to familiar maternal concerns. "I want to help you achieve your own goals, not just benefit from your help with mine." They established regular family meetings, monthly conversations where they would review their arrangement, address any emerging problems, and ensure that both their needs were being met. Agnes would maintain her consulting work and explore the travel opportunities she had been deferring. Danny would take primary responsibility for managing his own academic schedule, social calendar, and personal maintenance. Most importantly, they agreed to practice explicit gratitude and recognition. Danny would acknowledge Agnes's contributions regularly and specifically, while Agnes would express appreciation for his efforts to become genuinely independent rather than simply less demanding. By evening, they had transformed the formal lease agreement into something warmer but more sustainable. A partnership that honored both Agnes's need for respect and Danny's desire to be seen as a contributing adult rather than a dependent child. The financial arrangement remained, but at a level that reflected Danny's actual capabilities rather than punitive market rates. "There's one more thing," Danny said as they prepared dinner together, Agnes teaching him the techniques for preparing her chicken and rice dish while he handled the mechanical tasks under her guidance. "I want to apologize to Jake." Agnes looked up from seasoning the chicken, surprised by the suggestion. "Apologize for what?" "For letting him talk about you the way he did at the party. For not defending you. For participating in conversations that were disrespectful to you and to older women generally." Danny's voice carried the uncomfortable recognition of someone confronting their own moral failures. "I've been thinking about the things he says, the way he treats service workers and older people, and I don't want to be someone who goes along with that anymore." Agnes felt pride mixed with cautious optimism as she watched her son grapple with questions of character and values that he had never previously considered. The young man who had casually dismissed her as live-in help was examining his own complicity in attitudes that dehumanized the people who made his comfort possible. "What will you say to him?" "That I was wrong to characterize you that way. That you're not hired help but my mother who deserves respect. And that I won't participate in conversations that dismiss the value of what you and people like you contribute." Danny paused in his stirring, considering the social implications of his decision. "He probably won't understand, and it might affect our friendship. Are you prepared for that possibility?" Danny met her gaze with something approaching adult resolution. I'd rather have fewer friends who share my values than more friends who don't. As they finished preparing dinner together, Agnes felt something she hadn't experienced in months. The satisfaction of working alongside someone who valued her contributions while developing their own competencies. This wasn't the invisible servitude that had characterized their previous relationship, nor was it the cold transactional arrangement that had nearly destroyed their family bond. Instead, it was something new, a partnership between adults who happened to be mother and son, built on mutual respect and shared responsibility rather than assumed obligation or market-based exchanges. The grandfather clock chimed 7 p.m. as they set the table together, marking not just the passage of time, but the beginning of a relationship that honored both love and boundaries, care and independence. The challenging work of implementing their new agreement still lay ahead, but for the first time since her divorce, Agnes felt genuinely optimistic about the future, both her own and her son's. They had found common ground, not by eliminating conflict, but by addressing it honestly and working together towards solutions that served both their needs. Danny had learned that respect must be demonstrated rather than assumed, while Agnes had discovered that boundaries could coexist with love when both parties were committed to fairness and mutual growth. The lesson had been painful, but it had also been necessary, and perhaps most importantly, it had been successful. 3 weeks after their emotional reconciliation, the Steven household had settled into rhythms that would have been unrecognizable to an observer from just 2 months earlier. Agnes woke each morning to the sound of Danny already moving through his breakfast routine, not the rushed, entitled consumption of previous months, but the deliberate activity of someone managing his own nutrition and schedule. The coffee maker still gurgled to life at 6 a.m., but now Danny prepared his own meals, while Agnes enjoyed her first cup in the peaceful contemplation of someone whose morning belonged to her. The transformation hadn't been seamless. Danny's first attempts at independent cooking had produced smoke alarms, burnt pans, and meals that barely qualified as edible. But instead of reverting to maternal rescue, Agnes had established herself as consultant rather than replacement, answering specific questions, offering guidance when requested, but refusing to take over tasks that Danny needed to master himself. The key to scrambled eggs, she had explained during his third disastrous attempt, is low heat and patience. You're treating them like a race instead of a process. Danny had absorbed the lesson with the focused attention of someone who understood that competence required genuine effort rather than natural talent. By the third week, his breakfasts had evolved from barely edible to reasonably accomplished, and more importantly, he had developed the confidence that comes from mastering previously impossible tasks. Agnes found herself with time and mental space that had been absent from her life for years. The hours previously devoted to Danny's invisible maintenance now belonged to her, creating opportunities she had forgotten to want. She had contacted her former marketing firm about part-time consulting work, dusted off professional skills that had been dormant for 2 decades, and begun exploring volunteer opportunities that utilized her organizational capabilities for causes beyond household management. The Maple Grove Community Center had been struggling with their fundraising efforts for senior programs, and Agnes's proposal to restructure their marketing approach had been received with the enthusiasm reserved for unexpected expertise. She found herself attending evening meetings, contributing to strategic planning sessions, and remembering what it felt like to be valued for her intellectual contributions rather than her domestic services. I forgot how good it feels to solve problems that aren't about laundry schedules or grocery lists, she told Elena during their weekly coffee meeting. It's like rediscovering a part of myself that I thought was permanently retired. Elena studied her friend with the satisfaction of someone watching a long-term investment finally pay dividends. You look different. More like the Agnes I knew in college, the one with opinions about everything and plans for changing the world. Agnes laughed, recognizing truth in the observation. I think I spent so many years focused on maintaining everyone else's world that I forgot I was allowed to have my own. The new dynamic faced its first serious test when Jake Morrison arrived unannounced on a Tuesday evening, expecting the casual hospitality that had previously characterized visits to the Steven household. He found Danny in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up and hands covered in flour, attempting to master the chicken parmesan recipe that Agnes had agreed to teach him as part of their twice-weekly cooking arrangement. "Dude, what are you doing?" Jake's tone carried the bewildered amusement of someone encountering incomprehensible behavior. "Where's your mom? Shouldn't she be making dinner?" Danny continued rolling chicken breasts and breadcrumbs, not looking up from his work. "She's at her volunteer meeting. I'm making dinner tonight." Jake surveyed the kitchen with visible confusion, the organized chaos of someone learning complex tasks, ingredients arranged with the deliberate precision of a beginner following detailed instructions, Agnes's recipe card propped against the backsplash like a roadmap to competence. "Since when do you cook?" Jake settled onto a bar stool with the expectation of entertainment rather than assistance. "This is weird, man. It's like your mom has you doing her job or something." Danny paused in his breading technique, feeling the familiar irritation that Jake's comments now provoked, but hadn't bothered him just months earlier. "It's not her job, it's just life skills, things I should have learned years ago." "But that's what moms are for," Jake persisted, his voice carrying the casual entitlement that had once seemed natural to Danny but now sounded grating and immature. "Like my mom still does all my laundry when I'm home. That's the deal. I focus on important stuff like school and career, and she handles the domestic whatever." Danny slid the breaded chicken into the heated oil, concentrating on Agnes's instructions about temperature and timing while processing Jake's attitude with growing discomfort. "What happens when you graduate? When you get your own place?" Jake shrugged with the confidence of someone who had never questioned the sustainability of his approach. "I'll hire someone, obviously, or find a girlfriend who's into that stuff. There are always people who want to take care of that kind of thing." The casual dismissiveness in Jake's voice, the assumption that domestic labor was naturally someone else's responsibility, that care work was performed by people who wanted to do it, rather than people whose contributions deserved recognition, crystallized everything Danny had been learning about respect and reciprocity. "That's not how I want to live," Danny said quietly, turning the chicken pieces with careful attention to their browning progress. "Come on, Danny. You're telling me you'd rather spend time doing household chores instead of focusing on your future? This whole domestic thing is just your mom guilt-tripping you because of the divorce." Danny felt anger rise in his chest, but it was different from the reactive irritation of previous months. This was the considered anger of someone who had examined their values and found them challenged by casual cruelty. "My mom isn't guilt-tripping me. I'm learning to be a functional adult instead of someone who treats other people like domestic servants." Danny's voice carried a firmness that surprised both young men. "And I don't want to be the kind of person who thinks caring for myself and others is beneath me." Jake's expression shifted from amusement to something approaching concern. "Dude, what happened to you? This is your mom we're talking about. She's supposed to take care of you. That's literally her job as your parent." "No, it's not." Danny placed the finished chicken on a paper towel-lined plate with the precise care of someone following expert instructions. "Her job was to raise me to be independent and capable. My job is to become someone worthy of respect rather than someone who expects to be served." The conversation that followed revealed the fundamental incompatibility that had been growing between Danny's evolving values and Jake's unchanged assumptions. Jake viewed domestic competence as evidence of diminished masculinity, while Danny had come to see it as evidence of maturity and respect for others. Jake treated service workers and family caregivers as essentially invisible, while Danny was learning to recognize and value their contributions. When Agnes returned from her volunteer meeting at 8:30, she found Jake still arguing with Danny about the unnaturalness of their family arrangement, while Danny cleaned dishes and prepared tomorrow's lunch with the methodical attention of someone who had integrated these tasks into his evening routine. "Mrs. Steven," Jake said, rising from his stool with the performative respect he showed to older adults when he wanted something from them. "Danny's been telling me about your new arrangement. It seems like a lot of pressure to put on a college student who should be focusing on his studies." Agnes set down her purse and surveyed the kitchen scene, her son competently managing multiple tasks, while his friend criticized the development of life skills as inappropriate burden. She recognized Jake's manipulation immediately, the attempt to position her as the problem, to recruit her into invalidating boundaries that had been carefully negotiated for mutual benefit. Danny's grades have actually improved since he started managing more of his own responsibilities, Agnes replied with the calm authority of someone who had learned to trust her own judgment. It turns out that competence in one area often transfers to others. Jake persisted with the confidence of someone accustomed to having his opinions validated by adults seeking to maintain peace. But don't you think he should be focusing on his career preparation instead of learning to cook and clean? I mean, these are skills he can hire people to handle later. Agnes felt the familiar tightness in her chest that Jake's presence had always provoked, but now she understood its source. His casual dismissal of domestic labor as, quote, skills you can hire people to handle, revealed a worldview that dehumanized everyone who performed care work, reducing essential human activities to services that successful people purchased from invisible providers. Jake, Agnes said with the measured tone she had learned to use when delivering uncomfortable truths, the ability to care for yourself and contribute to shared spaces isn't a burden. It's basic adult competence. The belief that some people exist to serve others is exactly the attitude that creates problems in relationships, workplaces, and communities. But that's just how the world works, Jake protested, his voice carrying the frustrated tone of someone having their fundamental assumptions challenged. People have different roles. Some people are leaders and innovators, and other people handle the support stuff. It's efficient. Danny looked up from loading the dishwasher, understanding for the first time the full implications of his friend's worldview. What you're describing isn't efficiency, Jake. It's exploitation. And it only works if you convince yourself that the people providing support aren't fully human. The words hung in the kitchen air, like a verdict on their friendship. Jake stared at Danny with the bewildered expression of someone watching a friend embrace incomprehensible values, while Agnes felt pride mixed with concern for her son's willingness to defend principles that might cost him socially. This is insane, Jake said finally. Danny, you're letting your mom turn you into some kind of domestic servant. This isn't what successful people do. Successful people, Danny replied while wiping down the counters with the thorough attention Agnes had taught him, don't build their success on exploiting other people's invisible labor. And they don't maintain relationships by making other people feel worthless. Jake gathered his belongings with the dramatic flourish of someone making a statement. Fine. When you get tired of playing house and want to hang out like normal people, let me know. He paused at the door, delivering his final judgment. But this weird arrangement with your mom is going to hurt your social life, your dating prospects, and your career networking. No successful person is going to take you seriously if you're doing your own laundry. After Jake left, Danny and Agnes continued their evening routine in contemplative silence. The confrontation had clarified something important about values and relationships, but it had also revealed the social costs that might accompany Danny's transformation into someone who valued care work and mutual respect. Do you think Jake is right? Danny asked as they finished the kitchen tasks together. About this affecting my career prospects? Agnes considered the question carefully, recognizing its importance to her son's willingness to maintain their new dynamic. I think Jake represents one vision of success, one that requires other people to remain invisible and undervalued. But there's another vision of success that includes competence, integrity, and the ability to maintain relationships based on mutual respect rather than exploitation. Which one do you think leads to better outcomes? Agnes smiled, remembering her own career experiences with managers who treated support staff as invisible versus those who recognized everyone's contributions. I think people who can see and value all kinds of work tend to be better leaders, partners, and colleagues. They build stronger teams because they understand how organizations actually function, and they maintain better relationships because they treat other people as fully human. The validation Agnes had sought through their lease agreement had evolved into something more sustainable, a relationship based on demonstrated rather than demanded respect, where both parties contributed according to their capabilities and acknowledged each other's efforts. Danny had learned that competence created confidence rather than diminishing it, while Agnes had rediscovered aspects of her identity that extended beyond domestic service. Their first major test under academic pressure came during Danny's midterm week. when the stress of multiple exams threatened to overwhelm his newly developed organizational systems. In previous semesters, Agnes had managed his schedule, reminded him of deadlines, and maintained his environment while he focused exclusively on studying. Now he was responsible for balancing academic demands with household contributions and personal maintenance. "I don't know if I can keep up with everything," Danny admitted during one of their monthly family meetings, his voice carrying genuine stress rather than manipulation. "The cooking and cleaning and laundry on top of studying, it feels like too much right now." Agnes recognized the moment as crucial for their relationship's sustainability. She could solve his immediate problem by temporarily resuming full domestic responsibility, returning to the invisible labor that had characterized their previous dynamic. Or she could help him develop systems that would serve him throughout his adult life. "What specific tasks are taking too much time?" she asked. Danny consulted the schedule he had created to balance his obligations. "The cooking, mainly. The meal planning and shopping and prep work. It's eating up hours I need for studying." Together, they developed temporary modifications that addressed his immediate needs without eliminating his responsibilities entirely. Danny would prepare simpler meals during exam weeks, focusing on basic nutrition rather than culinary skill development. Agnes would handle grocery shopping for 1 week, but Danny would create the shopping list and pay for the purchases. Laundry would shift to a twice-weekly schedule instead of weekly, but Danny would maintain responsibility for the entire process. "This isn't permanent regression," Agnes emphasized. "It's strategic adjustment based on circumstances. The goal is learning to adapt systems rather than abandoning them when they become challenging." Danny managed his midterm week successfully within their modified framework, and, more importantly, he returned to their original agreement afterward without resistance or attempts to make the temporary changes permanent. The experience had taught him that flexibility could coexist with responsibility, and that asking for help didn't require abandoning independence. Agnes's volunteer work at the community center had evolved into a paid consulting position, bringing both income and professional satisfaction that had been absent since her divorce. She was developing a comprehensive marketing strategy for their senior programs while also exploring a part-time position with a nonprofit focused on elder advocacy. For the first time in decades, Agnes was building a professional identity that existed independently of her family relationships. "I never realized how much I missed having colleagues," she told Danny during dinner one evening. "People who know me for my ideas and capabilities, rather than my relationship to other people." Danny looked up from the pasta dish he had successfully prepared without assistance, recognizing the significance of his mother's rediscovered professional identity. "Do you think you'll go back to full-time work?" Agnes considered the question thoughtfully. "Maybe not full-time, but definitely more than the domestic management that's consumed the last 20 years. I want to contribute to causes I care about, solve problems that matter beyond our household, maybe even travel to conferences and workshops." "I'd like that," Danny said, surprising them both with his enthusiasm. "I mean, obviously I'll miss having you around all the time, but I think you should have a life that's about your goals, not just supporting mine." The conversation revealed how completely their relationship had evolved from the entitled dependence and invisible servitude that had nearly destroyed their family bond. Danny had learned to value his mother as a complete person with independent worth, while Agnes had rediscovered aspects of herself that had been dormant during her decades of intensive caregiving. Their monthly family meetings had become opportunities to celebrate successes as well as address challenges. Danny had mastered laundry techniques that actually improved the condition of his clothing, developed cooking skills that impressed his girlfriend Emma, and created organizational systems that had improved his academic performance. Agnes had established professional relationships that utilized her expertise, developed travel plans that reflected her personal interests, and reclaimed financial independence that allowed her to make decisions based on preference rather than necessity. Most significantly, their relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship between adults who happened to be family members. They consulted each other about decisions, shared professional and academic successes, and maintained their household as partners rather than service provider and client. The grandfather clock that had marked so many transitions in their relationship now chimed through evenings when they cooked together, studied in shared spaces, and planned their independent but interconnected futures. Agnes was exploring a river cruise through Europe that would occur during Danny's winter break, confident that he could maintain their household independently during her absence. Danny was considering a summer internship that would require temporary relocation, trusting that their relationship was strong enough to survive geographic separation. Their story had become one of successful boundaries rather than destructive conflict, of love that created space for individual growth rather than consuming it. The lease agreement remained in Agnes's desk drawer, not as a legal document but as a reminder of how quickly relationships could deteriorate when respect was absent, and how powerfully they could be rebuilt when both parties committed to mutual consideration and genuine change. As autumn settled over Maple Grove Estates, the Steven household reflected the kind of family dynamic that many of their neighbors were still struggling to achieve: two adults who loved each other enough to demand the best from themselves and each other, who had learned that care work deserved recognition and that independence required competence, and who had discovered that the healthiest relationships were built on reciprocity rather than obligation or exploitation. The transformation that had begun with hurt feelings and business arrangements had evolved into something much more valuable, a model for how families could adapt to changing needs while preserving what mattered most, and how love could become stronger when it included respect for everyone's contributions and potential. 6 months after their emotional reconciliation, the Steven household had become something neither Agnes nor Danny could have imagined during the dark days of lease agreements and financial crises. The March morning sun streamed through windows that Danny had learned to clean properly, illuminating a space that reflected their evolved partnership. Agnes's consulting materials organized alongside Danny's textbooks, a shared calendar marking both his academic deadlines and her professional commitments. Agnes reviewed her morning schedule, a nonprofit board conference call, a site visit for summer program evaluation, then lunch with Elena about a city consulting contract. At 64, she maintained the energy of someone who had rediscovered purpose beyond domestic maintenance. Danny emerged at 7:15, dressed professionally for his internship interview with County Mental Health Services. His routine had evolved beyond recognition. He prepared breakfast with competence, packed his own lunch, and organized his materials with skills that had transferred from household management to academic success. "How are you feeling about the interview?" Agnes asked, settling with coffee and a marketing proposal. "Nervous, but good nervous. Professor Kim says my experience analyzing family systems gives me insight most undergraduates lack." He paused, smiling. "She mentioned my understanding of power dynamics seems unusually mature." Agnes felt satisfaction at the irony. Danny's crash course in respect and reciprocity had provided psychological insights his sheltered peers lacked. His academic work had improved dramatically once he learned self-management, and professors noticed the increased focus that came from understanding consequences. "The position involves facilitating support groups for young adults transitioning to independence," Danny continued. "I keep thinking how much I could have benefited from that program a year ago. What would you have needed to hear? That taking care of yourself isn't beneath you. That people who provide care deserve respect. That independence isn't something you declare. It's something you earn through competence." He loaded dishes automatically. Also that family relationships should be reciprocal, not extractive. Their conversation was interrupted by Mrs. Patterson texting about Danny's approaching 21st birthday. Their elderly neighbor had become both witness and counselor to their transformation, and she wanted to contribute something special to his celebration. Danny crossed the street to speak with her, returning 20 minutes later with significant news. "Mrs. Patterson wants to host the birthday dinner in her garden. She says it's time for the neighborhood to see what real family partnership looks like." His smile widened. "She suggested we make it collaborative. She provides space and coordinate setup. We handle menu planning together. Guests contribute potluck style. She called it community cooperation rather than individual burden." The proposal reflected Mrs. Patterson's understanding of their lessons about shared responsibility. Rather than one person managing all hospitality, the celebration would distribute tasks among people who genuinely wanted to contribute. Agnes's consulting work had expanded significantly, bringing both financial independence and professional satisfaction absent since her divorce. The nonprofit had offered her a permanent part-time position with benefits, while the city contracted her for outreach programs targeting seniors facing family transitions. The work felt meaningful, not because domestic labor lacked value, but because she was contributing to causes beyond her immediate family while maintaining balanced home life. "I've been thinking about your European river cruise," Danny said as they prepared for their morning commitments. "I want you to book it. Not just research it, but actually commit to going." Agnes looked up with surprise. The cruise had remained in planning stages while she adjusted to balancing work and family. "It's a substantial expense, and I'd be gone nearly 3 weeks. Mom, you can afford it with your consulting income, and I'm completely capable of managing everything here." Danny's voice carried confidence backed by demonstrated competence. "More importantly, you deserve experiences about your interests rather than supporting everyone else's goals." Danny had researched European cruises himself, comparing itineraries to help Agnes decide. He had calculated their household budget to prove her travel wouldn't create financial strain, and outlined his plans for maintaining their home during her absence. "I want you to send photos and emails about everything: museums, cities, food, people you meet. I want to experience your adventure through your eyes, while knowing everything here is properly managed." Agnes felt tears threatening at her son's mature consideration of her happiness and independence. The young man who had dismissed her as "live and help" was actively encouraging experiences that had nothing to do with his needs. The birthday celebration arrived on a perfect April Saturday in Mrs. Patterson's garden pavilion. Danny had planned the menu, showcasing skills he'd developed while remaining realistic about his capabilities. Grilled salmon with garden herbs, roasted vegetables he'd mastered, and rice pilaf that had become his specialty. Elena arrived early with flowers and wine, surveying preparations with satisfaction. "Agnes, you look like yourself again. Not the diminished version disappearing into invisible service, but the woman I knew in college who had opinions about everything." Professor Kim came with Danny's girlfriend Emma, who had helped him understand academic frameworks explaining their relationship transformation. "Danny talks about your family partnership model constantly," Emma told Agnes. "He's become an advocate for reciprocal family relationships in our psychology discussions." Mrs. Patterson prepared remarks as evening light cast golden illumination across her garden. "I've lived here 40 years, watched countless family dynamics evolve, but I rarely witnessed such complete positive transformation as Agnes and Danny accomplished." She gestured toward them with affection. 6 months ago, this family was caught in patterns destroying their relationship: invisible service on one side, entitled consumption on the other. Today, they represent what healthy family partnerships look like when both parties commit to growth and mutual consideration. Quote, Mrs. Patterson raised her glass ceremonially, to Agnes, who learned that demanding respect doesn't diminish love, and to Danny, who discovered that providing care enriches rather than diminishes character. To families willing to evolve beyond comfortable dysfunction toward genuine partnership. Danny had prepared his own speech. "Mom, a year ago I treated you like invisible infrastructure rather than a complete human being. I consumed your care without reciprocal consideration and dismissed your contributions in front of friends who shared my entitled assumptions." His expression carried genuine remorse. "The lease agreement was shocking, but necessary. It forced me to confront the true cost of comfort I'd taken for granted, and demonstrated your worth in terms I couldn't ignore. What I learned wasn't just practical skills, though those proved valuable. I learned that care providers deserve recognition, that independence requires competence, and that healthy relationships are built on mutual contribution rather than one-sided service." He addressed their guests directly. "My mom taught these lessons through boundaries and consequences. She demanded respect by demonstrating her worth and helped me develop into someone capable of providing respect by refusing to enable my incompetence. Today we have partnership based on mutual respect and shared responsibility. Mom pursues professional goals while contributing to household management. I handle daily maintenance while contributing to shared domestic responsibilities. We consult each other about decisions and maintain our home as partners." As the evening concluded, Agnes reflected on the European cruise she had finally booked for June. "I can't believe I'm actually going. 3 weeks in Europe by myself for no reason other than my own interest." Elena smiled with satisfaction. "What are you most looking forward to?" Quote, "The museums, obviously. But honestly, What excites me most is being somewhere completely new where I'm just Agnes. Not someone's mother or service provider, but a woman with her own curiosity about the world. Later that evening, Danny shared news from his interview. They offered me the position. Full-time over summer, with possibility of continuing part-time during senior year. The salary covers all my expenses, including full market rate rent, if we want to formalize our arrangement. What did you tell them? That I wanted to discuss it with my family partner before making final decisions. Danny's smile reflected both humor and genuine respect. I wanted to ensure my success doesn't create problems for your plans. They discussed schedule adjustments and modified responsibilities that Danny's professional commitment would require, recognizing that his achievement validated everything they had worked toward. His development of competence had created opportunities impossible under their previous dynamic. I want to maintain our partnership model even with new income, Danny said. Not because I need financial assistance, but because I value our collaborative approach. As they prepared for sleep, Agnes reflected on their journey from invisible labor and casual dismissal to mutual respect and shared achievement. The lease agreement remained in her desk drawer as a reminder of how quickly relationships could deteriorate without respect, and how powerfully they could rebuild with genuine commitment to change. The grandfather clock marked time that belonged to both of them. Time for Agnes's professional development and personal adventures, time for Danny's academic success and relationship building, time for shared responsibilities and family connection. Most importantly, it marked time consciously valued, rather than carelessly consumed. Agnes fell asleep with satisfaction of someone who had reclaimed her life while maintaining valued family relationships. At 64, she was embarking on deferred adventures and pursuing abandoned professional goals while maintaining a relationship with her son that honored both love and boundaries. Danny fell asleep planning for summer that would test every skill he'd developed: professional competence, domestic management, financial responsibility, and respectful partnership that would serve him throughout adult life. At 21, he was becoming someone who could maintain healthy relationships based on reciprocity, who valued care work and its providers, and who understood that independence required competence rather than dependence on others. Invisible labor. Their story had evolved from hurt feelings and business arrangements into something more valuable. Proof that families could change seemingly entrenched dynamics when love was strong enough to include difficult growth, and recognition that respect must be demonstrated rather than assumed. They had found their way to the relationship both deserved, built on love that included boundaries, demonstrated respect, and partnership serving both parties rather than extracting from one to benefit the other. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us. Quote,